Christmas Cigar Night with Larry Elder and Dan Proft on Thursday, May 17th. Get your tickets today at 560theanswer.com/cigar.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. This report that Art Laffer and Steve Moore have launched several years back, the Rich States, Poor States Economic Index, give you a sense of how your laboratory of democracy is doing against the other 49. Of course, Illinois is the meth lab of those laboratories. Looking at everything from taxing to spending to wage shedding to kind of general economic policy and ranking the states so you have a sense of where it might make economic sense to be and where it might not make economic sense to be. I have a dispute with this year's report already. I cannot believe that Illinois is doing as well as 48th in the nation.
Oh, you thought we'd be dead last?
Oh, Vermont and New York, 49 and 50 respectively.
Really?
I don't know. We're going to have to get an explanation on this. We're the worst governed state in the history of America, so I don't know how we can be in a better position than Vermont and New York. But perhaps Jonathan Williams can help us understand. He is the chief economist and vice president for the American Legislative Exchange Council, who joins us now to discuss this report. Jonathan, thanks for being with us.
Well, good morning and greetings from the land of make-believe here in Washington, D.C.
Well, we could be similarly described here where the land of math is an opinion, I suppose. So just give us kind of the foundation of this report, what you guys do to make these assessments in terms of, kind of economic vitality state by state.
That's exactly right. So Art Laffer, Steve Moore, and I put this together 11 years ago now, and we've had a consistent measurement of the states and their economic competitiveness, and we look at 15 factors in Rich States, Poor States, which are all available at richstatespoorstates.org, where you can go and look at all 11 years of this report and see how Illinois has actually declined quite a bit in the last few years, even though you're still competing with New York for 50th. But we look at things like taxes, regulations, labor policy, things that we know matter for economic growth, and Art studied this for 50 years. And also, importantly, there's a lot of rankings out there, as you all know, and Illinois does horribly in most of them. But ours is a little bit different in that we focus solely on factors that state legislators and governors can control, not things like weather and quality of life and other things like that. Hard policy variables that move the lever for economic competitiveness.
And who's number one?
Number one is Utah. For now, it's really unreal. Utah's been number one for all 11 editions of Rich States, Poor States, and it had a really good run of it with tax cuts, budget responsibility, and pension reform. They were ahead of the curve 2011 and transitioned to more of the defined contribution system where we know states and local governments need to head. So basically everything that Illinois hasn't done, Utah's done pretty well over the last 10 years or so.
Well, in her op-ed in the Tribune the other day, Krista McQuarrie, a friend of the show, asked, what's better, unions running state government or Hicks running state government? And it turns out that it's the Hicks because, and I say that lovingly, Indiana, thanks to Mitch Daniels and then Mike Pence and Eric Holcomb, third in the Rich States, Poor States ranking, and Indiana over the last decade has shot up that ranking, has it not, Jonathan?
Well, Indiana is one of the biggest success stories in the 11 years of measuring the states and Rich States, Poor States. Indiana and North Carolina and Wisconsin really some of the best, moving up the most. Indiana just several years ago was in the mid-20s in economic outlook, and as you mentioned, now they stand at number 3 nationally. Of course, after right to work, after their tax cuts, after property tax reform, so many things that they've done right under Mitch Daniels, Mike Pence, and now the new governor.
And interestingly, McQuarrie makes this point. The Indiana lawmaker base salary, $25,000. That is, well, by comparison, Illinois is $68,000. So we have a professional political class. It doesn't seem like we're getting better results, though. Interesting.
Well, in Indiana is just a different model of government, no doubt about it. And it's awfully clear based on one of the things we always measure in the report is just how much people vote with their feet, move from one state to another. The proof's in the pudding. Indiana has now reversed long-term trends away from the Midwest, as we've all realized. I'm a Michigander by nature, and so we all know what the Midwest has suffered over the last couple of decades. Indiana's really reversed that trend, while, of course, Illinois has just put the pedal to the metal and now, of course, is down more than 700,000 residents on net to the other 49 states in the last 10 years alone. So, it's a good piece in the Tribune. I read it the other day, and it's a great way of delineating the different models of government that are clear between Illinois, Indiana, and certainly Wisconsin as well.
And a lot of Illinoisans are moving to places like Tennessee and Texas. How do those two fare?
They're two of the best. And one of the reasons why is those two states, of course, have it in common that they don't have a personal income tax. And in fact, Tennessee is just going about eliminating the last vestiges of the income tax that was on investment income. They have not had one on wage income in their history. But Texas has been just the economic engine, of course, of America over the last decade or so. And once again, as people vote with their feet, Texas is up more than 1 million Americans on net over the last 10 years. And in 2020, of course, this is going to all pay off when it comes to redrawing congressional lines and seeing which states get more political influence. Illinois is going to be on the losing end to 1 or potentially 2 congressional seats, it looks like, where Texas is going to gain 3 to 4 new congressional districts in the United States House. So there you have it. Results in economics actually paved the way for more political influence as well.
Speaking of economics, and we've got some slow learners here. We'll get your reaction to this. You think this might help our situation in Illinois. The Illinois Economic Policy Institute, which is a left-wing organization, has proposed to double the state's motor fuel tax from 34 cents to 85 cents to lock in Illinois as the state with the highest state gas tax. You think that'll help?
I'll tell you what, Illinois has raised taxes more than any other state according to our rankings, and it's no surprise to anyone listening to your show, of course, but it's not even close to the next state. It is unreal in how much that tax increase came back to bite taxpayers, and it will in future years. So just the idea of raising any other taxes, unless the goal is really competing with New York for being 50th out of 50, maybe they'll, remove your beef with their index, and you will be 50th next year if they get their wish on this gas tax.
Very good. And also, too, we'll perhaps get the Democrats' wish on a graduated state income tax, too, which is in the offing. Let me ask you something more generally, though. The title of the report is Rich States, Poor States. But there's also seems to be very different things going on in red states versus blue states, states governed by conservative reformers like in Indiana, Wisconsin, versus states that are still tethered to the left like Connecticut and New York.
And Illinois.
And Illinois. Talk about what's happening in the red states versus the blue states.
Well, right. I mean, I think it's pretty clear. I mean, the facts are what they are, and we don't look at the politics of it in the report. But if you look at simply who controls the states that are ranking well versus the states that are not, the states that are looking at real conservative reforms like Wisconsin and Act 10, or like right to work and the movement in Kentucky and Missouri, competitor states to Illinois that are going to move the ball in the right direction because of those choices to become freedom to work states. And then you look at what the conservative governed states have done in reaction to federal reform. That's really the untold story, I think, of the state legislative sessions in 2018, is we're seeing even more of this balkanization effect of states between the rich states and the poor states, and that the well-governed states, the conservative-governed states, are taking the extra resources that they got from federal tax reform, the unexpected revenue, and using that to cut tax rates even further. That's why states like Idaho moved up so much in this year's index. Georgia almost made the top 10 because they used federal tax reform and propelled that to cutting state rates. While, of course, we're seeing the hand-wringing from Andrew Cuomo in New York, from, let's say, Governor Brown in California complaining of losing the SALT deduction as part of federal tax reform. And then, of course, seeing more revenue come in, but then using it to grow government. So if anything, it's going to accentuate the differences between the states governed by free market conservatives and those governed by the left.
If you were advising Illinois' political ruling class on one thing, there's only one thing they can accomplish, what would be the most impactful improving Illinois' economic climate, because there's so much to do. Is it the dealing with the nation's highest unfunded pension liabilities? Is it a workers' comp rate that is 2.5 times what Indiana's is, for example? Is it the highest property taxes in the nation? Is it cutting structural taxes, corporate income taxes? Is it making Illinois right to work? One thing from all of those evils that we have to combat here, all of these, the parade of horribles, what one thing would you recommend?
Well, the answer, of course, is yes to all of those.
Right.
But I think if you had to choose one, probably the most impactful out of any one, and pensions is a huge one, but I think it is right to work, considering that you're surrounded by right to work states. When we talk to businesses looking to move from one state to another, it's a yes or no binary choice for them. If the state is not a right to work state today, they are not even in the running for that new million or billion-dollar investment as businesses look to move. The results have been swift in Kentucky, in Missouri, in my home state of Michigan, in Wisconsin. I mean, that has been the movement over the last 5 years, and states that are not keeping up with it are just falling further and further behind.
He is Jonathan Williams, Chief Economist and Vice President for the American Legislative Exchange Council, and also the author of the report, American Legislative, Executive Council. I'm sorry, right? No, it's ALEC, right? You're the Chief Economist for ALEC.
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
That's right.
I got a misprint here, sorry. So Chief Economist for ALEC, also the report Rich States, Poor States, this economic index. Jonathan, Steve Moore, Art Laffer have been putting together for more than a decade on all of the 50 states. Excuse me. Jonathan, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate your insights.
Thanks for having me. I only wish I had better news.
Yeah, well,
right.
we've done it to ourselves.
We're getting used to it. And Jonathan joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.